So now let's talk about divisions. Imagine, if you will, that these are the beads going around the piece that you cut with the beading tool, and now we're starting to divide it into a number of divisions around the circumference. These patterns are identical in that they each have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 colored beads. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so this one, as you can see, is elongated, and this one is more like a perfect diamond, simply because these divisions are squares and these are rectangles. Now when I'm deciding how many divisions I want on a piece, I take that into consideration because I want to know whether I'm going to have more of this shape in a pattern or that shape in a pattern. And so that's just something to bear in mind. I like to keep my divisions to the point that it's closer to a square. So if I'm using a 1/4 inch beading tool, then I want my divisions to be about 1/4 inch apart. Now obviously if you're doing something that has a shape to it, as the diameter increases, then this distance increases. As the diameter decreases, this distance decreases. And so that's one of the reasons why I do a transition from 32 divisions to 96 divisions. And so bearing that in mind, that has an effect on how your pattern comes out. So hopefully this graphic shows that to you and how that works. One is not necessarily better than the other. It's just this is the effect that the rectangle has as opposed to a square. Okay, let's talk about divisions again. So if you can imagine that these lines represent the bead that is cut with the beading tool that go around the piece. These vertical lines are the lines that I put in with the wood burner for the divisions. Now in both of these pictures, this bottom part is the same, exactly the same. And on this side, I've divided this bead and all of these larger beads in half. So now in place of one bead, I've got 2 beads. And so I come off of that larger bead and go on an angle both directions and then come back. But when I come back together, it takes 2 beads to stay centered. Same thing here, 2 beads becomes my center. There's nothing wrong with that, and I've done that a lot. Over here, if my pattern dictates that I need to stay centered as I increase the density of the division lines, then I do it this way. So we've got this same bead right here again, only this time I've divided it into 3 beads. So what that gives me is a single centered bead. So I come up the same amount of beads and across, and when I get back to here, instead of 2, I've got a single bead as the center. Here I've got 2, here I've got a single bead center. And so that's the reason why in a lot of my platters I start out at, let's say, 32 divisions, which is what this would represent. And then I go to 96 divisions, which is 3 times 32, and that keeps my pattern centered all the way through the piece. Here's an example of that. In this piece that we've been looking at, if you look, let me get this so you can see it. So if you look right here at this bead, as I go up here, that next bead is cut into 3 divisions. Let me use a pencil so I know we're staying in focus. So this red bead right here is cut into 3 divisions. And so now I've got a single centered bead that goes all the way through the pattern clear to the top. And so I start down here at the center with 32 divisions, and then I've divided it. You can see this bead here, hopefully. Let me see how close I can get. So this bead right here is a 32 division, but you see right there, it's divided 3 times into 3 beads, divided twice into 3 beads, and then that gives me a center bead, so I can keep a pattern centered clear to the outside as long as I do that. So we start at 32, we go to 96, and then here we are 288, and then actually right here we are 576 divisions. Let me get that down where you can see it. Up here it's 576 divisions. Now you'll notice that when we get to that point, that is just the other bead divided in half. And since that's just a background pattern that I'm not going to be painting, then it's being divided in half is all it needs to be. And so that's the reason I would do something like this if I knew I wanted to keep something centered without having to stay with a double wide. Because see, even if I broke these in half again, then I would still have to paint 2 divisions to stay on center, where over here I'm down on a single bead. So let's talk about patterns a little bit now. This is a piece I did back, I think about 2018, and this is the hand-drawn pattern that I used for it. You can notice around the outside that there are 2 different ideas. The one to the right side is the one I ended up using, and then I actually added some more detail to it as I went along. Here's another hand-drawn pattern. This pattern right here, I ended up doing that in 1/16 inch beads, and it was one of the pieces that was featured on the Woodturners catalog, Craft Supplies, in I think 2019. So if you still have that laying around, you might look and see how that looks finished. And then of course, this is the pattern we're using for the little box that I'm demonstrating. Now this was not hand drawn, at least not on this piece of paper. So now I'm going to show you how I did that. So I have an iPad here and an Apple Pencil. And so there's the pattern on the iPad on a piece of graph paper. Now let's turn some layers off now. Leave that one on. Okay, so what I've got there is a piece of graph paper. You gotta watch where you touch on these things. Piece of graph paper that I took a photograph of and then imported it into the program. Now, you can take a photograph of a piece you're working on and do the same thing. But let's start with the graph paper. So let's turn the base layer back on. Okay, so what I've got here now is I've got a base, I've got a black line up there. I've got 31 beads this way, and my pattern is 90 that way. So what that translates to is in this piece, I've got 31 beads from here to here and 90 divisions around the outside. This black line and this black line bead is represented by those two lines right there. So now I know I've got that space to work with on my pattern. Another thing that's important is you'll notice right here where it says 30, if you count from this side of that white square to the same side of the white square again, there's 30 divisions there. 30 goes into 90 3 times, so this pattern will repeat 2 more times. That's important that that works out like that, so you don't end up with a pattern that's only half there. So I protect this layer by creating a new layer, and my new layer is called pattern. So let's turn that on. And so there's my pattern. And that's just the black part of the pattern. Gives me a chance to look at it. I can save that. If I want to mess with it a little bit, I can make a copy of it and mess with the copy and not disturb this one. Let's go to another layer. Let's turn on the red. Okay, and let's turn the blue on too. So now I've got the pattern there, but I don't have these finer grid lines in there yet. Okay, so let's turn that on. Let's go up here, that's in another layer, grid. Let's turn it on. And there's the completed pattern. I can go up here and I can highlight PDF, and I can email it or I can send it to my printer. I can do whatever I want with it. But there's the pattern right there. Now if I want to mess with that some more, I create another layer or make a copy of it and work from the copy, but either way it's there. Now up here, this is the eraser, okay? And so here I can determine how large of area it erases. Over here I'm going to draw. Let's change to a different layer. This is something that took me a little while to get onto, so that I was drawn on the layer I wanted to. Let's zoom this in and let's make sure which pen I'm using. Okay, I've got 2 pens here. I've got one that's, I named the basket pattern, and one that's a monoline. The monoline is a finer line, which I use to draw the division lines where I want to do it. And this is cool because if I pull down here and hold for a second, it comes up and it makes a straight line out of my crooked line. If I want to undo that, I can just hit that button right there and go all the way back, or I can erase it. So let's select that brush and draw a pattern. Now I'm being pretty sloppy, but it doesn't matter. And you have to do this left-handed. It doesn't work right-handed. And so there's a pattern. I can add to it, I can change it if I want to add some division lines in there to highlight it. Zoom that in a little bit. If there's something I don't like about it, I can erase it. I can add, yeah, let's get the other pen. I can add something out here that might make the pattern look a little cooler. And that's basically it. I don't want to spend the time on a long tutorial, but my wife put me onto this, and it has been such a pleasure to use. It has, like I mentioned before, has literally saved me hours and hours of time doing designs that on paper where you know, you just have to start over. A lot of times if you make a mistake or it's not what you like, you basically start over. And a lot of times that means drawing something that you've drawn already that you like, but in order to really get the feel of the pattern, you have to redraw it. With this, none of that happens. I store all of my patterns in here electronically. When I finish a piece, I take a picture of it and store it in here along with the patterns. So this is what's called a stack. So there's a whole bunch of stacks, you know, different pieces. You can go through here and open that up. There, that's a picture of a completed piece that I actually could go and edit it if I wanted to, but there's a completed piece that's stored electronically that I have access to anytime I want it. So this is an amazing program. 20 bucks is what I paid for it on the App Store. They support it. There are hours and hours of tutorials on how to use it. I use a very small portion of it. They update it regularly. If they came out tomorrow and said the price has gone up to $500, I would probably still pay it. So there's that piece, and there's the real thing.